Good afternoon. This is Rebecca Martin at Nash. I'm really pleased today to welcome you to the next in our series of TS3 webinars. Today we will be taking up the very important issue of transfer. I think, as many of you know, we have identified transfer as another issue that is very important in the student success agenda, and one that is particularly relevant for systems, since many of us are in systems where we are concerned about providing for smooth transfer for our students across our institutions and into and out of our institutions as they move to other systems or other states or other higher ed sectors across the country. And so today we are going to hear from 4 of our Nash system colleagues, each of whom has a specific set of issues to share with us. Jason Lane is the director of the System Center and dean at the College of Education at SUNY Albany. Daniel Knox is the assistant provost for academic planning and student success in the SUNY system, working at the system level. Rebecca Karoff is the Associate Vice Chancellor at the University of Texas System, and Carleen Bandasandi is the Associate Vice President for the University of Wisconsin System. So what we are going to do is move through these 4 presentations. They each have a lot of great content to share with you, and we want to be sure that we have time to hear from each one of them. Once we do that, we will open it up for questions. So I would encourage you, as you move along through these presentations, if you have questions, that you use the chat function to enter your questions, and then Jason at the end will moderate and pull forward questions from all of you for the 4 panelists. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jason Lane.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Thrilled to be here with everybody and appreciate you joining us late today. What I want to do is present an overview of what systems are doing in the area of transfer. And I'll say these are preliminary results from the survey because we are still accepting feedback, responses on the survey, and we'll send it out again to individuals across the system. So far we've had, across the network, 14 systems who have responded to this survey. And the survey was generated essentially out of an ongoing conversation a number of our system leads have been having that transfer is something that is important for systems to be dealing with. We began to realize that many are grappling with it. They're at various phases of grappling. As we'll hear from our panelists, some are further down the process than others in terms of policy development and implementation. But many are increasingly interested in it, and they're interested in it both from the issue of student success, thinking about that, how do we help our students be more successful? But in some states, this is becoming an issue of elected officials, so there are a number of external forces that are pushing us to think more about transfer as well. And so in the survey that we had so far, when we looked at what stage systems are, you can see here that a number of them are sort of right now in the data collection stage, trying to figure out what transfer looks like within their system, what campuses are currently doing. Others are further along, thinking about policy planning and development and implementing new strategies for student success. And then others are not anywhere near this, or they are further along toward implementation. The issues that they're looking at, and not a surprise really, are on the right-hand side of the slide in front of you. But you can see the big issues really folks are thinking about are how do you align curriculum across campuses? How do you deal with transfer credits? What are the policies regarding this? And how do you count those credits toward degrees? How do you deal with appeals when a student encounters an issue that a credit is not accepted? Who moderates those issues and facilitates an appeal process? Then issues regarding grades. A handful of campuses that are dealing with issues of reverse transfer, although we know that's growing across the country. How do we move credits between institutions to essentially retroactively award degrees that students may have earned through accumulation of credits but just hadn't got them packaged in the right way to give an institution to be able to award the degree. For example, a student transfers from a community college to a four-year institution without earning an associate's degree. They accumulate enough credits at the new bachelor's institutions to be able to earn an associate's degree. How do we take those credits and reverse them back to the community college to award the degree? And then thinking about issues more at the campus level, but advising and admissions, and how do we work with campuses on these issues? Particularly advising is something that seems to be growing in interest. A small number of the systems reported here, but we know that folks are really thinking about the issue of advising because that really does impact what students are able to do or not to do. And that's such a campus level issue to be able to deal with. Next slide. To break it out, these are systems that responded to the survey. So if you're not up here, we'll be coming after you. But you can see that there are some systems such as Maryland and Colorado State that really are grappling across a holistic set of issues in the transfer space. On the other hand, systems like Alaska are saying, the alignment of the curriculum is really where they're focusing their issues, and how do we get our campuses together to think about curriculum alignment. So there's a broad spectrum of where systems are engaging in this space. Next slide. The final piece we want to talk about a little bit is the data side, and we can bring up the other aspect of this slide too. We asked systems, where are they targeting their efforts right now in terms of transfer? And not surprisingly, it's all three levels that you see here, that there's a lot of work happening at the campus level, and obviously we need to be doing that because the curriculum rests in the hands of the faculty. We are working at the system level in terms of those cross-cutting governance issues that we can deal with uniquely as systems, but then increasingly we're seeing states who are involving themselves. So this may represent working across systems to develop transfer protocols that are systems that are segmented out. So a community college system working with a four-year system, but it also represents increasing political engagement by elected officials in thinking about what the state regulations might look like or mandates might look like regarding transfer curriculum. We've also been looking at data and what we're doing to collect data, or we might think about this in terms of transfer analytics, right? Thinking about transfer is very different than thinking about a student within a given institution. What systems, the data systems are collecting right now represent everything from your basic sort of contact information to degrees awarded, and a large number are looking at course and grade data records. About half of the respondents also are now picking up financial and recipient information. What was interesting though is that some of the challenges that in the qualitative data that systems talked about were increasing pressure to make student success data public. How do we do that for students who are moving across campuses in ways that we can sort of recognize all the various ways that students now experiencing higher education outside of that traditional institutional unit? How do we figure out metrics that we are able to compare institutions relative to their success in working with students and also with transfer students, but also thinking about how do we compare our transfer students to our native students and what the success rates look like in those sorts of comparisons. How do we pull data together across campuses to be able to track students, which is some campuses do this well. They have student unit ID records that they can match students across all the system. SUNY has that level of data down to the section level for all of our students with a single unit ID, but not all systems have progressed to that level of being able to track students at the ID level, the individual level across campuses. So more and more there's issues there, and then sort of how do we manage issues around FERPA and policies regarding the participation or reverse transfer and the sharing of actual student achievements across campuses. So those are some of the high-level findings. Again, we're going to be coming back to our system leads and asking them, those who haven't, to complete the survey, because what we're really trying to do is do a comprehensive review of what is happening across all of our systems in the area of transfer, so that we could put a white paper together and share that with the network, so that we really have some benchmark data about where systems are and where they want to be going. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Knox from SUNY to talk about the seamless transfer.
Okay, thanks, Jason. And I want to thank everyone for the invitation to come and tell the abridged version of SUNY's story. We're going to try to make sure we go through this quickly enough to give space for the other folks and to ask questions. I do want to note that off screen, I'm joined by Paul Wilner from Institutional Research. And so when we get to the student outcomes data that I'll share, that's Paul's work. And so if you have any more technical questions, you'll be in good hands. He's the smart one in the family, so I just want to note that. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, so we'll start with this. So probably some folks are familiar with this and others it might be new. So I just wanted to level set and say, when we talk about SUNY's seamless transfer policy, what is it? So this was adopted by the Board of Trustees in December of 2012, and we implemented it for students entering fall 2015. And there's quite a lot to it, but there's really kind of three main pillars. The first is that we instituted credit caps at 64 credits for associate degrees and 126 for baccalaureate degrees. We do have a waiver process for that and a slightly higher requirement for engineering, but for all the other programs, it's those numbers there. And then a big focus was on the alignment of instruction within the first to the lower division requirements. And as noted in the survey, we're certainly not the only ones working on that, right? So for us, that meant extending SUNY's general education requirements that had previously been required of the baccalaureate degrees into the AA and AS transfer degrees. So that is 30 credits required in 7 out of 10 content categories. And then the second piece of it, I'll say a little bit more about this in a minute, but we had these discipline-based faculty-developed transfer paths, we call them, but these are the required lower division courses in the major that are guaranteed for transfer. So previously, those had been advisory, and this policy required that content to be included in the AA, AS, and baccalaureate degrees in those disciplines. And then finally, the policy described the need for the Provost Office to develop an assessment plan. And so I'm going to show you the first 3 years of those results. The other thing I wanted to note that I think is important is we've been at this for a long time. So if we look back over, I guess we can go back to the master plans of the 1960s and see references to transfer in there, but we'll skip over the Jurassic period and kind of pick up with the modern building blocks that are included in the policy. So I mentioned SUNY Gen Ed. So that was initially created in December of 1998, and that required 30 credits in 10 out of 10 categories for the baccalaureate degrees. In 2009, 2010, we created the first round of these transfer path curricula, and this was in 37 academic disciplines and involved about 400 SUNY faculty. And those, there was some parallel policy work that went on that made the general education requirements more flexible, so it was 7 out of 10 categories instead of 10 out of 10, and also guaranteed transfer of the transfer path courses with a grade of C or better. As I mentioned, December 2012 was the adoption of the current seamless transfer policy framework. In July of 2013, we sent out the memorandum that described the implementation guidance. In spring of 2014, which is it's another whole story that I don't have time to tell, but we did another round of the transfer path discussions, and this brought the number up to 59, and that involved close to 900 SUNY faculty involved in that round. We finished our transfer path course database in March of 2015, and then as I mentioned, the implementation date, which we met, was for fall 2015. Students entering that semester, and that was when we required campuses to report out the status of their programs and kind of sign off that they had implemented. So fast forward to now, we are doing the first round of interim assessment, which I'll show you the results here in a second. Okay, so before we get to that, I'll just show you some kind of high-level SUNY data, and you can start to see, and there's some early results here to point to as well, but you can see why we care so much about transfer students, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but we have a lot of transfer students. So we have about 52,000 in 2017-18, and that was roughly split, slightly more, 27,000 transferred between SUNY campuses, and then another 24,000 transferred to SUNY campuses from non-SUNY. I'll point out that SUNY transfer policy applies only to SUNY transfers, okay? If you look at the percentage of degrees awarded to transfer students, you can see how many there are as well. So nearly half of all of our baccalaureate degrees were awarded to transfer students at 48%, and then 32% of all of our associate degrees. So it's just a big population, and so we you know, that's why we focus on them so much. And I want to point to here in the pie chart, you can see the ways that they tend to move around between sectors. So typically transfers talked about as being this community college to two-year to four-year pipeline, right? And that's super important, and indeed the largest chunk of transfers we have at 56%. But notice also that another 15% were two-year to two-year transfers, 14% were four-year to two-year transfers, and then the remaining 15% were four-year to four-year. So our conception of transfer is omnidirectional, and we want to make sure that wherever students start and wherever they finish up, that we can make that as efficient as we can. Okay, a couple of fine...
Just quickly for clarification for people, could you talk about the SUNY system composition?
Sure. It's 64 campuses. We have 30 community colleges, and the rest are four-year campuses. So, and then we have some specialty colleges as well. So, and it's all it's important to stress that that's all under a single board of trustees. So when we do policy work like this, it can apply to all the sectors together. So. So just to sort of point out some of the changes that we've seen since implementing seamless transfer in 2015, the percentage of two-year to four-year transfers has increased by about 7%, and that was very stable at 48 or 49% for many years before that, and so we did see that change. And we also saw the percentage of students transferring with associate degrees completed tick up a little bit by about 2%. Next slide. Okay, so when we're talking about the interim assessment, there's really two main pieces, okay? The first is a faculty survey, and that is designed to assess whether or not the transfer path curricula in their discipline needs to be reviewed. So one of the things that we think is really important is to make sure we have a regular cycle of review so that the curriculum doesn't get ossified, right? So if we never develop the cycle of review, you know, people would have no idea maybe where this comes from or how it was developed, and there would be no opportunity to refresh that. So we think that's really important, and that's built into the policy. So this faculty survey was just aimed at asking simply, does the transfer path in your discipline need to be reviewed, and with what urgency? And out of those data, we hope to develop a multi-year cycle of review, and in fact did over a period of 4 years. So we had 43 of our campuses submit nominees, slightly more four-year colleges at 24 versus 19 community colleges. And we surveyed just over 1,000 faculty in the 52 academic disciplines. The unit of analysis here is more the department than the individual faculty member, so we weren't trying to survey 40,000 faculty, but we were actually asking campuses to submit representatives for their campus if they offered programs in that area. So I'll point to the response rates here. Not too bad for an email survey these days. We had about 55% respond from the four-year colleges, and then just over 50% from community colleges. That was important for us because there was a narrative out there that said that all of this work falls on the community colleges, and four-year campuses don't care about this and don't pay attention to it, and these results kind of counter that narrative a little bit. So next slide. So overall, we asked, you know, does the transfer path for your discipline need to be reviewed? About 72% said no, and 28% said yes, and there was some variation by academic discipline, pretty similar between the sectors. So it's important to note this because one might ask, if 72% said that we didn't need to do this work, that why are we convening the groups? And again, you know, when we went out to faculty, we explained to them that it's really important to make sure we have this cyclical review, and that even if they don't change anything, that we want to give them the opportunity to have those discussions, and then also to form a community and make sure that there are relationships established between departments that send students back and forth. So many of them have done that for years and never had the opportunity to meet. So we think even aside from the curricular questions, that this is that's worth investing in. Okay, so we now have out of that we're in year one of the 4-year review, and we have about 375 faculty going right at it in discussions in 11 academic disciplines, and we'll just keep going through the 4-year cycle of review. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to pivot now to our student outcomes data and try to get through this pretty quickly. So our basic model is we're performing a pre-implementation analysis, and it's a cohort study where we follow a cohort of students across 6 years, and we compare native and transfer student outcomes. And then we do a post-implementation study repeating that methodology with a 2015 cohort. And we would be comparing native and transfer student outcomes, but also against the baseline study, okay? So we don't have, obviously, the full 6 years of data yet, but we do have the first 3 years. And so we're able to make comparisons mostly between the associate degree outcomes. So we're looking at associate degree completion rates, associate degree credits at completion, and terms to degree, a time degree measure. We're going to need more time to look at the baccalaureate outcomes, vertical transfer patterns, and something we're looking at regarding course repeats. So next slide. Okay, so the first change that we saw is that between those two cohorts, the percentage of underrepresented minority students increased by about 6.9%. And then we do see the associate degree outcomes seem to be pointing in the right direction. So the 2015 cohort is so far outperforming the 2011 cohort. We saw 3-year completion rates increase by 1.5% for all students and 2.6% for the URM students. We saw a time to degree decrease by, on average, 0.15 terms for all students and 0.20 terms for URM students. I like to point out that obviously for degree completers, nobody completes 0.15 parts of a term, but that was kind of the average effect size for all the students in the cohort. And then the average credits at completion decreased by 1.16 credits for all students, and then 1.4 credits for the URM students. So those results were statistically significant for all the outcomes. So we saw, in a nutshell, we saw the gains, but the greater gains for the URM students. And so we hope to see that persist over the 6-year cohort study. And so I think there's one final slide. So I was asked to present some lessons learned. So I was just out in Minnesota with my colleagues, and I presented 10 lessons learned, but I think I only have time for 3, so I'll just pick the 3 that make sense. So first thing, you know, I showed the timeline just to show that we worked at this for a very long time, and there were iterations and pieces that were built over a long period of time. So I think it's not feasible to boil the ocean. This is really hard and complex work, and so being able to prioritize it and pace the work over time is pretty essential. And we went to where we followed the data to determine where that was. So what academic disciplines had the most students, and where were students having the most problems, and things like that. So that was a data-informed strategy to be able to prioritize it and pace it over time. I think super important as well is to have shared governance and faculty at the table designing the processes and assessments. So we have an advisory committee that is chaired in alternate years by our faculty governance leaders, and includes representations from chief academic officers and students and transfer advisors. And they work with the provost's office to design the transfer path discussions and how that should work, and appeals process and the assessment and all that stuff right at the beginning. So we don't do it and then go ask for feedback. We do that collaboratively, and that is a key element of what we learn. And then the final thing, particularly in the faculty discussions, the academic disciplines are very different. sort of things like determining consensus or what qualifies as data. Just as an anecdote to finish, I recall asking the English faculty group if they would like to do a survey at one point, and was nearly hanged from a lamppost. So it was, that was not well received. They don't do surveys, they do discussions. So those kinds of academic disciplines, the cultures between the disciplines are critical to working with these different groups. So I'll leave it there. I hope we didn't take too much time, and if we got time left for questions, let me know.
We've got one question out in the text, but we'll save it till
Okay.
the end, Dan, if that's all right. You can think about it here at the end. We'll switch to Rebecca. I will say from a SUNY perspective, Dan worked across all these disciplinary groups. He began to become known as the faculty whisperer. He was able to sort of bring people together across disciplines in pretty amazing ways. So Dan, thank you for that perspective from SUNY, and we'll turn now to Rebecca Karoff from UT System.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. And this will be a very different case study. And in fact, the title case study implies completed analysis and closure on the topic under study, and no such situation in Texas exists, or in the University of Texas system, where transfer students are moving parts and transfer student success is a moving target. It's messy, it's swirling, and it's very much a work in progress. The UT system has a long way to go before we come close to some of the things that SUNY's doing, and before we just achieve the necessary changes we want to make in pathways for our students, student outcomes, and improve student experiences. But having said that, in the UT system and across Texas, we're really doubling down on efforts to support and bolster transfer student success through a multi-pronged and collaborative approach across our system, the state's other higher education systems, and the community college districts. And then with, of course, the support, guidance, and pushing of our SHIO, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Recent legislation, as is true in many of your states, is also playing a role with impacts and consequences yet to be determined. So my piece will focus on the system level work, not the institution level. And I do want to say at the institutions, that's the locus of incredible activity, intentional interventions, lots of changes being made to really address transfer student success, but I won't be able to capture that here. So in terms of the UT system, as you see from the slide, we've got 6 health institutions and 8 academic institutions, including 5 Hispanic serving institutions. And it's, of course, when we talk about transfer students or even student success, we do largely focus on the undergraduate students enrolled at our academic universities, so that we have, as you can see, about 180,000 undergraduates, of whom over 62,000 are transfer students. We have a large Hispanic population. 58% of undergrads are counted as underrepresented minority students, mostly Latinx. And our Hispanics account at 2 of our institutions for over 88 and 80% of students for our 2 border campuses, UT Rio Grande Valley and UTEP. Next slide, please. So in terms of the transfer student profile for the UT system, as I said, we have over 62,000 transfer students. 55% are female, 45% are male, 47% are Hispanic, 28% are white, and the other major racial ethnic groups make up less than 10%. We have one campus, UT Arlington, which has really a majority of its students are transfer students, 60% of undergrads. That's a much higher percentage than at any of our other academic universities. First-time transfer students made up 35% of our total first-time student population. And 55% of those students attended only 2-year colleges, 23% before transferring, 23% 4 years, and 22% attended both. And students enroll about 5 to 7 semesters on average before transferring to UT institutions. And we have this sort of funny number, 1.5, they attend 1.5 other colleges before coming to us. A number, there was that one number that Dan presented that was also like, yeah, this is I don't know what that looks like, but it's definitely what the average data tell us. So next slide, please. And then there is the vast complex of Texas higher education. It's got a vast complex of transfer pipelines. There are over 1.5 million students who go to college in Texas at both public and privates. And the UT system actually enrolls 1/3 of all students in public academic institutions in Texas higher ed. We are by far the largest university system, but there are 5 others. and there are also 50 community college districts. And I bring all this up because the picture of the transfer in the UT system does not take place in a vacuum. It doesn't even take place in a system context. It takes place in a statewide context. And this sort of impacts everything that we do as a system, and impacts what our institutions do. And I know this is true to varying degrees for every public university and system in the country, yet the size of Texas does complicate things. The coordinating board oversees the post-secondary sector and is given a lead role in implementing legislation. And it's generally a great source of data, including transfer data. At the same time, some of the data is complicated. Transfer data, for example, does not include dual credit students in Texas. They're counted as first time in college. So this will create a little bit of instability and inconsistency in the data, since dual credit students come in first time, full time in college in their first semester at one of our universities, and then like a semester later, they're often characterized as juniors or sophomores, depending on the number of credits they're bringing with them. So transfer student pathways and mobility occurs, and it occurs in ways by transfer that's vertical, lateral, reverse, and swirling, and we are trying to sort of attend to data and an understanding of all those different students, the ways they enter our institutions and how we can best serve them. Next slide. Across Texas, the pipelines are leaky, so that for every 100 students who started at a two-year college and transferred to a university, 57 graduate within 4 years of transfer. And that 57% it coincides exactly with the graduation rate for the students in the UT system. I'm not going to share too many other outcomes at this point, but next slide, please. I do want to just talk a little bit, though, about what we're doing to serve what we're doing in the UT system to serve the needs of transfer students in Texas. There are multiple responses and initiatives across our 8 academic universities, and very much in collaboration with partners. And I just want to say that this work, all of this work, lies at the intersection of and brings together data, policy, and practice, with important recognition that we will make the best headway in each of these arenas through partnerships and collaboration across sectors and stakeholders that go beyond the UT system. Strong relationships, we all know, are always key, and we have to really work at those relationships with all of our transfer partners, and that in some ways includes most other higher education institutions across Texas, 2- and 4-year. So some of the things we're doing, we have a UT system transfer study underway. We were sort of in not paying good attention to transfer student data, but we have a phenomenal IR office here in the UT system, led by my colleague David Troutman. And so we are now looking very closely at the data that we have, looking at around feeder schools, doing some very cool visualizations of data with our feeder schools for each of our institutions. It's actually really, it's a great way to sort of think about who your primary partners are. We're looking at the credits and semesters accrued. We're looking at disaggregated student outcomes. And we're also hoping to arrive at a kind of, at a shared definition of transfer and shared metrics with attention in years to come to see how we're changing those outcomes. And it's really great to see SUNY's built-in assessment model, because that's something we don't have yet, but it's inspirational. And what I wanted to say is one of the things we sort of uncovered right away as we started looking at our UT system transfer student data is that each one of our 8 academic universities has a different definition for transfer students. So this is, it just kind of tells you, okay, so we know that's our starting point, different definitions. We have to figure out then how to sort of aggregate and then disaggregate, and probably not do comparisons in traditional ways with that kind of data. Another thing that we've also convened just in the last few months is the UT System Transfer Advisory Group. This is a great network, a collective problem solve of people who want to do some collective problem solving, composed of institutional transfer leads at each one of our academic universities. And it's really clear in the conversations we have and hearing about the best practices and challenges that are shared in these through this advisory group. It's clear that our campuses really are laser focused on transfer student success, and they're really serving transfer students, I'd say, differently and in new ways than they ever have, in part because we know that well, there's some legislative push here, but there's also just an awareness, a growing awareness that these are students who were not serving, have not been serving as well as we could. We're hoping that we can use this transfer advisory group to help us do some collect some qualitative data and analyze it that will complement beautifully the quantitative analysis we're doing here at the system. And we think that this group in general will help us as a system develop a robust and diverse matriculation pipeline of students who have access to, enroll in, persist, and complete degrees, regardless of where they start. The third bullet there is another project that we're involved in. It's called the Texas Transfer Project, including the Dana Center, and then 26 2 and 4 years across Texas. This group has been, the Alliance has done some really ambitious goal setting on transfer student outcomes, very aspirational, and it has now a phase 2 focus on strategic partnerships through the convening of regional 2-year and 4-year schools. The UT system has 4 years, four of our institutions, 4 of our 8 academic universities are part of this project, and Virginia and Minnesota also have state-specific projects as part of this larger grant that, as I said, was mostly consultant-led. We're also working closely with the Texas Association of Community Colleges. And that's the sort of advocacy group for all 50 community college districts. There is no system in Texas for community colleges, but the association does some phenomenal work convening, and the president of that, of the Texas Association is someone I work closely with, and he views the 50 community college presidents as his board. But they have a Texas Student Success Center, which is a member of the National Student Success Center Network. They do lots of community college convenings or resource and research center. They do phenomenal work to align, integrate, and evaluate student success for their students at their 2-year institutions, and by default, those students who are then transferring on to 4 years. They've been, we're trying to share data in more intentional ways with that center. And then just another thing that we worked very closely with with the Texas Association of Community Colleges, work on dual credit. We partner with them to conduct a statewide dual credit task force that was quite successful. We're working on some follow-up now, and I'm also working closely with the president of the association to develop an equity and dual credit blueprint. Finally, there's this new legislation that was passed, SB 25, passed in the 2019 legislative session last spring. If you could go to the next slide. This bill has a bunch of different sections. Here are the 4 sort of major components. The bill is designed to address credit loss, enhance affordability, improve academic progress and timely graduation, and reduce student debt, like all good transfer bills. It has some great intentions. It has enormous unfunded mandates, and it probably won't resolve the biggest problem of all in Texas, which is the applicability of transfer credit to majors. I think that's where we see so much credit loss. That's where we see students accruing excess credits that will never transfer to degrees. So the bill, while designed to be a problem solver and driver change, we'll see where it ends up. We're cautiously optimistic that its benefits will outweigh its challenges. And just to look at some of the major components, there's the university reporting on non-transferable credit that I'll return to at the end here. There's earlier filing of degree plans. I think everyone agrees this is a good thing. 15 students at 30 credits for transfer students, where previously it was at 45 credits. There is an emphasis on more transparent course sequencing and stronger articulation agreements. So for moving forward, all institutions of higher ed in the state are required to develop at least one recommended course sequence for each undergraduate certificate or degree program, allowing for degree completion within 2 years for a 60-hour degree and 4 years for a 120-hour degree program. It turns out this is a little harder than I had originally thought it would be, in part because what we've heard our campuses say is, their math department will change up the course sequence. They won't tell anybody. They won't tell their primary feeder campuses. They won't put it on the web. They won't let students know. They won't let they don't let advisors know. There's nothing malicious there. It just turns out to be a more complicated mandate than we had realized, although I think it's a really important one. There's also going to be a study and report on the core curriculum, including analysis of the feasibility of implementing statewide meta majors. I know many of your states have meta majors or are trying to implement them. And this study will also revisit the current core, possibly resulting in changes. This too is going to be complicated. Changing the core is a political hot potato for faculty across Texas. There is great autonomy, individual institutional autonomy and flexibility for how institutions implement the core. So that'll be interesting if depending on how it moves forward. We also had sort of pushed,
Rebecca,
yeah?
We're about at time.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let me just end there. There's a lot of complicated. I have this final image. Someone asked me, is this a student being chased or hunted? But no, this is we're just meant to show students running up towards mobility on clear, transparent, and high quality educational pathways. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. That was a great overview of a very different situation that we have going on at SUNY and shows the diversity of what we have across our systems. Next, we'll turn over to Carlene from Wisconsin.
Great, thank you, thank you. Well, I've heard from all of the other systems that this work has been ongoing for a long time. There's many reviews, a lot of data collected, and intersection of initiatives. And I must say in Wisconsin that even though transfer and seamless transfer has been a part of our university system strategic plan, it took a tectonic event to bring more issues to focus on transfer. And by we mean that the Earth's plates are shifting. And that tectonic event at the UW system was the restructuring of the system, where 13 branch campuses then were joined with 7 of our 13 universities. And you can imagine the associate degree mission blending with the bachelor, master's, and other comprehensive in our research universities caused quite a stir. So what I'm going to do is talk about transfer, looking at transfer from a system view, as Rebecca did, and also to look at these elements holistically, to look at transfer efforts and how they are interrelated. And I'm calling policy, tools, agreements, collaborations, and legislation as being an ecosystem of transfer. You can't ignore one of these, and each one impacts the other. Next slide, please. The first I'll talk about is policy, and after our restructuring, we needed to go back and look at the policy, especially those related to the associate degree and how those programs interrelated with programs at the comprehensive universities. So maybe some of you are undergoing mergers and blending of campuses and programs across programs, and you need to go right back to the policy to see where things are changing. So we have refreshed our guaranteed transfer admission policy. Students at a branch campus may transfer then to one of the universities if they meet the criteria. And that's really a student-centered policy as well. We've reviewed our current transfer policy to make sure that the equivalencies and accommodations are clear for the associate degree students as well. And with that work, we see that our number of associate degree programs is increasing, the Associate of Art and the Associate of Science being the pathway degrees to baccalaureate degrees across the system. So I think that element of systemness is alive and well in transfer. We're also clarifying the alignment of these new transfer degrees to the associate degree standards. And those are all aligned to our UW system learning goals that very much reflect the AAC&U learning outcomes as well. And then we're looking at reverse transfer, again, putting that lens on to be for seamless transfer, to look at the student experience. We want to ensure that the reverse transfer policies actually work for the students and mirror the student experience as they may go from a branch to a comprehensive over to a technical college, which in our state is in a different system, and then back again. So how can we create a policy, a body of policies that reflects the reality of the student journey and transfer? Those kids that Rebecca are showing running up those stairs, they might go back a little and jump off and come back again. So how do our policies then support those students as well? And looking at policy again across all of our institutions from the system level. And that's really policy is related to all of those other areas that I talked about. The second piece I want to share in our ecosystem would be to talk about the tools. We have, as a system, invested millions of dollars in tools to assist our students, faculty, staff, and the universities as well to have a better experience. And these tools can assist students, faculty, and staff and advisors to self-serve, to have access to that information so that when they are freshmen in Fond du Lac planning, they can look at what are those programs in Green Bay and how does my work from a Fond du Lac branch campus articulate with the degree program at the Green Bay campus. So we've adopted some college source products, Transferology and TESS, TES. That's to improve our course equivalency documentation across the system and across also UW system and the Wisconsin Technical College system. So across the two systems in our state working together with the same tools. And we have great expectations that that's going to really help the students to self-serve as well. We also are able to include articulation agreements in the college source tools, and that would allow a student, again, on day one to be able to see how those courses are articulating. We also are using new advising tools from the Educational Advisory Board, the Navigate program, and launched a 15 to Finish campaign and have had some intensive transfer advising as well. So the tools that we have to support the policy, to support the collaborations, and to make sure that we're spot on for our system board and our Wisconsin state statutes related to transfer. The next slide, please. Another important part of our plan and our ecosystem, it would be our articulation agreements. And we do have hundreds of articulation agreements, but we're now looking at what are the opportunities to have system-wide articulations with other state systems, our partners in the technical college system. And we're also looking at how articulation agreements can help us fulfill both of our missions, and that is to make sure that we have people who are appropriately educated and supported in for the Wisconsin workforce, so that we're taking high demand areas for workforce growth and need and aligning our work with how we articulate transfer between the technical college system programs and the UW system programs that best serve Wisconsin needs. So I think we're leveraging transfer to help us meet some other missions, part of the mission of the UW system as well. So program to program articulation, and that again relates to the tools that we have to document these. This relates to how we're looking at course equivalencies, and it looks at the market analysis that we're doing from a system office and at each of our universities to make sure that we are putting up programs that meet the need and demand of the state. The next slide, please, would be building collaborations. I've mentioned a couple. We have an intersystem steering committee working on the curriculum transfer. We also have intersystem committees looking at, as I mentioned, the college source tools for the equivalencies as well. Through that collaboration, I think it's really important, and I'm going to share this with lessons learned, is to create a statement that joins our universities, other institutions in the state of Wisconsin, a shared statement about transfer. What is it really for? How do students figure in that statement? How do we look at the equity of the transfer experience for all of our students? So creating some glue through a shared statement, I think really speaks volumes to the value that we put on transfer, and that helps us make decisions across all other sectors. We are taking our intersystem team to the National Leadership Academy, and that's another way to build collaboration across the systems. And I think for Wisconsin that's really, really important that we have that united front moving together. So again, collaborations and partnerships. Something else that we did for collaborations was we brought all of our institutions together, including K-12 from the education sector in Wisconsin, the technical college system, Wisconsin faculty. We gathered and collaborated around a math initiative so that we could articulate some common learning outcomes in the first level of courses that students take in math in their pathways, and then to make sure that there is transfer and understanding of those math courses going forth. And that was a wonderful grant from what was Great Lakes Corporation, is now Ascendium. So we were very fortunate to leverage that type of collaboration. And that kind of was like, it not working like a well-oiled machine, but that has brought a lot of energy to other transfer efforts. So build on collaborations that you have. It's really important. Another collaborative piece is we have the early college credit program, which is looking at all of the courses, college courses that students are able to take in the K-12 area, and to look at how those courses as well are working into transfer, because students are beginning their experience before they come to our university doors. So we can't forget that those courses also need to be considered for transfer. Moving ahead, the next slide would be legislation and policy. And I'll break this up into, we have a Wisconsin statute that was just amended and has now become an act. We have a universal transfer credit agreement, and that used to be for 30 credits, and that would be 30 credits that are in common across the technical college system and the University of Wisconsin system, and that recently was raised to 72 credits where they need to be transferable. So we're mining our articulation agreements and looking for those other 42 credits. I think that we're up to 45 right now, so we're getting there. I must admit, we all swallowed very hard when we were handed this legislation, but I think that with the work that we're doing in math across our systems, I think that we can find in our new program articulations, I think we can find those courses, but that's something that, that we're working with at this point. We are currently looking at our Board of Regents policy, good old 7-1. That's our transfer policy, where we are aligning principles of the board policy with our joint statement and our beliefs. So it's been wonderful to work on that. We're looking at interinstitutional as well as the growing menu of extra institutional awarding of credit. And you know, in Wisconsin, we have the flexible option programs where you can look at competencies that people have and transfer to credit. We also have a very strong All Learning Counts grant from Lumina that's looking at possibilities of credit from the workplace and students proving their demonstrated knowledge and skills through workplace and other training. So that's part of our extra institutional policy. We at the UW system level, we're very clear about our associate degree standards, and that goes for all of our institutions, all of these new associate degrees coming together. The associate degree standards are built on a very strong foundation, and that would be the shared learning outcomes, the shared learning goals in the state of Wisconsin. So we're seeing the interrelatedness of all of those pieces coming together as well. As far as lessons learned, I think it's important to leverage the policy that you have. And my colleagues and I have been looking through our policy related to transfer and associate degrees and reverse transfer, considering the student experience and seeing how all of those things flow together. We have interrelatedness that we are just uncovering now after our restructuring, and it's helping guide, I think, a better pathway for transfer for students. Second thing is build on collaborations and partnerships with your underlying principles. And number three, I think providing faculty, staff, and students with tools where they can engage in self-service and have access to that information so that they're better equipped when they go into advising, when they go to another campus and ask questions. I know I rust, but I want us all to have time for questions. So thank you.
Carlene, thanks so much, and my thanks to everybody for your fantastic presentations. I think as folks can see here, three very diverse systems in how they are structured and composed, three varying, I think, environments that they're dealing with, but some commonalities. The policy environment is very important to be thinking about, and that's a particular lever that systems have to work with. But also the relationships matter, that so much of this work is not just about implementing a policy, but it's really working with our campuses and colleagues within the system and outside the system to develop the pathways and the technology and the advising that goes along to make sure that these policies can be successful. We've had a pretty active exchange on the text. Some people might want to open that up to see some of the questions. If you have more questions, feel free to put them in there. We only have a couple minutes left. One question I'll raise, folks referenced the SUNY data that showed the success for URM students was higher than, or the impact was better for URMs than for non-URM students. And perhaps the question I'll raise to the group is how you're thinking about the issue of equity in relation to transfer and the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, I guess I could speak to, I think the question that went unanswered in the chat that was, why we think that, so the first is one way we're thinking about it is to measure it and to pay attention to it and to, to see what impact some of these policies might be having on that population. So I think the short answer is we don't know why exactly. I would point out that there were a number of student success initiatives going on alongside seamless transfer at the same time. So similar to Wisconsin, we implemented advising tools, so DegreeWorks. We implemented system-wide. There's some guided pathways work going on, just to name a couple. There was a lot going on. So it's very difficult to disentangle causal effects on certain populations. We tried, but I think one of the things that goes along, I suspect a couple of things. One is the credit cap. So we brought down, the requirements that students need to complete by quite a bit during that time. And then also, I think taking almost the need for some advising out of individual programs. So we made the transfer path content required within the program, so you don't need to go to a website and look it up, right? It's embedded in the program. If you're in business, a business program and an AS program in business, in a community college, you take those courses. So you don't, we're not relying on student-driven advising to go find them. So those are a couple of things that I think, but the short answer is I wish I knew.
In Wisconsin, we have done 2 rounds of what is called the Wisconsin Transfer Equity Study, looking at the yield of underrepresented students and do they matriculate, and there's a set of recommendations that we, from both of those studies, that we are trying to put into policy and into practice.
Rebecca?
In Texas, we don't have the data yet, but that's part of what our transfer study is doing. We are, of course, disaggregating. I'm looking at I do have a little bit of data on 4-year graduation rates for transfer students by race across our institutions, but what I don't have the side-by-side comparison to see how it's compared to the native students. So this is something that our transfer study will hopefully really unpack very carefully to look at the equity dimensions and all this.
Dan, there's one question at the very, very top from John that talks about, when asked about whether or not their departments need review, were faculty asked about transfer in, transfer out, or both? It's a multi-directional policy, so I think it's really about everything. You weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't differentiate by sending and receiving institutions. I mean, primarily a particular institution might be more one than the other, but we didn't ask based on that. Although in some of the faculty discussions that are going on right now, particularly in mathematics, there's a survey that the faculty put out to their colleagues that asked for certain questions based on more of a sending, receiving, orientation. But we really just wanted it to be able to understand, do you think this curriculum needs to be discussed? It was kind of a yes or no type of thing with some urgency questions as well. So it was a very simple survey.
So we are coming to a close. Those who may be watching the windows behind me will have seen the sun have set. It's dark here in New York. So it's time for us to call this to a close. This is a new topic that NASH is beginning to tackle, I think, more systematically. We realize that transfer is something that is very much a function of systems, and so we will be ongoing in our pursuit of providing a community for folks to be thinking about these various issues regarding transfer. We know that almost 40% of all students nationally, undergraduate students, are transfer students, and you saw some of the numbers that were represented here just by the systems on the webinar today. So this is an incredibly important topic moving forward. Carlene referenced the NASH Leadership Academy. We've had a number of teams who have come through in the past that have dealt with transfer as their topic through organizational change and have brought folks from the system offices and the campus together. So I'll put a shameless plug out there for those thinking about this work to be thinking about perhaps using the National Leadership Academy to vault your work forward. It's been a great success for a number of places. But thank you for tuning in, for being part of these conversations. My real thanks to the three presenters here who have allowed us some insights into the work that they're doing, all at various stages, but all doing amazing work. And we can see how comprehensive this work is. It isn't a single silver bullet. It really is a comprehensive approach to figuring out how do we address such an amazing issue. As I talked about earlier, we are going to be hopefully putting a report together in the spring, looking at some of the data around transfer, but also being able to untangle some of the issues we talked about today, what's happening across our network, our TS3 network on transfer, to be able to share that out with folks so we have some co-learning to further facilitate there. And we'll be coming back to you all on this call, asking you to fill out the survey if you haven't already, so we can get some additional information that we can feed into this report. So once again, my thanks to Carlene, Rebecca, and Dan, and Paul off to the side for the work that they did in preparation for this. I wish you all a very good night and look forward to seeing everybody soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Everybody. Bye-bye.